Back to Miller. Oh, my goodness.
Herbert.
Sidearm sling, and it's a touchdown.
Tyrese Maxey.
Oh, good spin move by Filipowski for the news. Give him 9.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast here on PickSwap Media. Your host, Ryan Coyle, joined alongside a newer guest, I guess we could say, a first time, I believe, on the PickSwap Media YouTube channel. We are joined tonight by Tyler Gurman for a new episode where we'll be breaking down some college basketball stuff as we're recording this on Tuesday night, October 31st. Season's less than a week away now, so we're trying to get out some more and more college basketball content as we gear into the season. It's been an awesome college football season, but we got to start turning our attention to the hardwood as well. So we're bringing in Gurm to kind of give a bigger scope of the season coming up and kind of what to expect from some of these top teams, maybe some teams that are overrated, underrated, and kind of just get into everything big picture college hoops. So welcome back to the show, Tyler, and how are we?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me. I'm ready to get this thing going and really excited to get started next week on November 6th, I believe.
Yeah, so it's starting up next Monday, November 6th. Not that many big games coming up in this first week, but then the next week is when we get that Champions Classic rolling and we really start to see some good games. After this week in college football, I believe there's only each team's playing only like 3 more games, so we're really starting to get to the tail end of that, and college basketball start to be heating up. So great time of year, as always, where we kind of get the best of both worlds with football and basketball kicking at the same time. So where I kind of want to start tonight, some just big picture thoughts. Looking at the top 25, we're going to just go through the top 10 real quick. You got number 1, Kansas, number 2, Duke, number 3, Purdue, number 4, Michigan State, number 5, Marquette, number 6, UConn, number 7, Houston, number 8, Creighton, number 9, Tennessee, and number 10, the Florida Atlantic Owls, last year's Cinderella team to go to the Final Four, checking in at number 10. And then just any teams, I guess, in that top 10, Gurm, that kind of stick out to you, maybe a little overranked, a little underranked, or a team that you're surprised it's not up in that top 10 at the beginning of this season?
No team necessarily that's not in the top 10, but a little bit of a surprising one for me. I'm not surprised by the rank necessarily based on how things kind of ended and how the amount of pieces they got back. But number 3, Purdue, was kind of like a team that I consider to be a little overrated. I think that I kind of stand on an island compared to most people with that, because I agree with everyone that, Zach Edey is without a question. He's going to be the best player in college basketball. He's one of the most dominant bigs in the game, and he's going to be a good professional. But it's what actually is surrounding him that concerns me a little bit more than just him himself. The Boilermakers, they definitely go inside-out play style. They don't shoot the ball too well from 3. And they're not a very good team in terms of taking care of the ball either. I don't know if you got a chance to watch any of the exhibition games that were televised over the weekend, but they played Arkansas on Sunday night, and they had 20 turnovers as a team. And now I know Arkansas is one of the better defensive units in the country, but to be the number 3 ranked team in the country, 20 turnovers is a pretty surprising number, especially early on without injuries and things like that. So I know it's still a little early, obviously, and I shouldn't jump to the gun too much, but that was a pretty concerning thing to me. And they're bringing back all 5 guys. So to me, it was kind of, they were good last year. They were good in the Big Ten, but how much different is this team really going to be as compared to last year? Is it going to be a lot of the same? And that's kind of what I'm getting, that there wasn't really a lot of changes, if that makes sense, because if you're not going to make any changes to your lineup or to your roster, what changes are really going to be made in terms of improving on the deficits that made you a first-round exit last year in the tournament? So,
yeah, I think when you look at Purdue from last year, they were just so young all around. Zach Edey, I mean, most of their guards that played were freshmen, and a lot of the guys were, unheralded recruits, guys that weren't even in like the top 300. So they took their bumps and bruises at that time, but they still went on and had a pretty dominant season throughout, winning the Big Ten regular season and the Big Ten tournament. And like we say all the time, the NCAA tournament, that's the reason why it's the greatest sporting event in the world, just because anything could happen on any given night. They got basically the worst matchup for them, just a team that just completely spread them out, went 5 guards, and let's see if we can just go out there and outscore him and keep Zach Edey from just dominating the entire game. And that's exactly what FDU did and pulled off that historic upset. I'm intrigued to see, though, bringing all that stuff back, like you said, with all these returners, what this Purdue team does look like. I'll get into them a little bit more later, but I'm very interested to see Purdue, and I think they're certainly going to be one of the biggest storylines, and not just because they have Zach Edey coming back, the preseason National Player of the Year, first team All-American, but also because this is a team that does have that sour taste in their mouth from last year. So they're certainly going to be a group to watch. When I'm looking at kind of the top 10, though, the team that definitely sticks out to you, I was talking to someone earlier, if you saw today last year FAU in the top 10, like you probably would have looked at someone like they had 10 heads.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that they went through the tournament last year, but not just that. I mean, they had a 30-3, I believe, was their record regular season and conference tournament record. So this wasn't a team that just got hot at the end like a St. Peter's did, or even like Oral Roberts a few years ago. This is a team that played really well throughout the entire season. I think that they actually should have been ranked a little bit higher, potentially in that top 5. They went 35-4 over last year, good from the start of the year to the finish of the year. Only lost one key piece from last year's team in Michael Forrest. Everyone else returned. Guys flirted with the NBA draft, flirted with the portal, but everyone came back, and this should be a team that should just be able to improve off of last year's result, which was a trip to the Final Four. Just such an experienced team, and I think they have less pressure on them this year too. Moving up a tier to the American Conference, they'll have more opportunities to play some better teams rather than down in Conference USA, where that's usually on like a 1-bid league. The Americans should get 3 or 4 teams prototypically. So this is a FAU team I'm certainly intrigued to see again. I'd be surprised if they don't find their way back into the Sweet 16. I think they also have a pretty loaded schedule this year. They'll be on kind of the national spotlight a lot more. So also looking forward to seeing if they're able to handle that business and handle the pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily too surprised, kind of like you said, with the top 10, and I think they kind of proved their dominance because they were, especially with how well they were able to shoot the basketball. That's not something that, guys can get hot, but not a whole team gets hot. That's a thing that it goes for an entire season. So I wasn't too surprised to see them at 10. I don't know. I'm not sure if I would necessarily agree with the top 5 spot, but that's just because of conference level, especially, and I know we're going to get into it a little bit later, but the Big 12, man, that conference is lethal in terms of the amount of depth of teams that they have. And, but, we'll see what happens with them. I think they're going to be another really strong team this year. They're returning almost their entire roster. So, that's going to help a lot coming back into this year and moving into a new conference. So, definitely a team on the rise for sure.
All right, I guess that's kind of our scope at the top 10. We'll certainly touch on some of the other teams there in a little bit, but to round out the rest of the top 25, we won't go through the entire list. If you want to look that up, you can yourself. But is there any other teams that you kind of want to touch on in the top 25 that are sticking out to you a little bit that you kind of just want to make a point on, whether it's good or bad?
Yeah, so a team that I'm very intrigued with, and maybe it's personal opinion as opposed to the rest of the country, we'll see, but it's number 22 Villanova. Kyle Neptune was in his first season last year trying to follow up one of the greatest head coaches of all time in Jay Wright, and I would say for Villanova standards, they didn't really follow up to what would be expected going 17-17, 10-10 in the conference last year. I expect for them to bounce back in a big way, and I don't know how you feel about that, but for being a team that, from what I've read, is now the oldest team in college basketball, I think they have 2 sophomores, and then the rest of them are juniors and seniors with a few grad seniors on top of it. And they're returning 2 of their best 3 top scorers too, in Justin Moore and Eric Dixon. So I expect for them to kind of make a little bit of a run and kind of prove that they're still a blue blood and they get back on top even without Jay Wright as head coach.
Yeah, I think over the past 5 years or so, maybe even the past decade, the best conference in college hoops has been the Big 12. But I think the Big East is getting back to that revival, and we're going to see a really strong year from the Big East. And that's the only reason that I'm a little bit cautious with Villanova. Like you were saying, if Jay Wright was still there, we know what he's able to do year in and year out. Kyle Neptune did have a bit of a down year last year, but he was without Justin Moore most of the year. First year as a head coach at a major program. He had his first year a couple years back at Fordham, but last year it's a big transition going to Villanova to be the head coach. So you could have expected some adjustments last year, maybe a little bit better. They were playing better down the stretch once Justin Moore got back in the fold, but this is a team that went out and did some major work in the portal, bringing in TJ Bamba, Tyler Burton. Those are two of the top wings in the portal. And they also brought in Hakeem Hart from Maryland. This is a team, I think they have 5 guys on the roster now that averaged double figures last year alongside Justin Moore and Eric Dixon as well. So this is a very experienced team, but also a team that's looking to throw in some new guys into the rotation, into the mix. Also brought in Lance Ware, the big man from Kentucky. Didn't get much shine there, but it sounds like he's going to have a big opportunity to play at like the 5 this year and let Eric Dixon focus more on just being that 4 and being able to score the ball. They're going to have guys like Mark Armstrong step up and some of these other young guards that are going to have to be able to shoot the ball a little bit better this year. This is a very deep team. It sounds like they're going to be playing 8, 9, 10 guys on any given night, and they could certainly make a run themselves, but they have to play the likes of Providence, like I have on my hat right now. That's going to be a team competing for a tournament spot. St. John's with Rick Pitino is going to be a strong team, I think. Creighton, Marquette, both in the top 10. This is a very strong conference this year, probably the strongest the Big East has been since they went back to this old style. I didn't even mention UConn as well, the reigning national champion. I believe they're number 6 in the poll. So this is going to be a tough year in the Big East, but I'm intrigued to see how Villanova kind of responds to that and what these new faces and new places do for them. But when you talk about what you were just mentioning, and I was talking about with Villanova as one of the older teams in the country, I'm really looking at one of the younger teams in the country, and it's usually one of the younger teams with Kentucky. They come into the number 16 spot in the top 25 poll. I'm surprised to see them ranked this high, just based off of the past few years. They haven't had the greatest success. They're going to be a very talented team. They have 4 of the top 15 recruits in the country. And I believe they also have the number 22 recruit. So you look right there, 5 of the top 25 recruits in this class. But they haven't made the second weekend of the tournament. So they haven't made the Sweet 16 since 2019. Oscar Tshiebwe gone. They're going to need someone to step up there. I thought they would start the season unranked because they just haven't earned the right to be up here. But guys like DJ Wagner, Aaron Bradshaw, Justin Edwards, and then they bring in transfer Trey Mitchell. They bring back Reeves as well. This is a very talented team, but as I kind of talked about with Villanova too, you're throwing a lot of new guys in there with the additions in the portal with these freshman recruits. So how really well are they going to mesh? We don't know. It's kind of a wait and see mode with Kentucky as well. So just curious to see what you think of the Wildcats going into this season.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of like what you were saying, right? Well, as we were talking about with Jay Wright, I think part of the reason they got the number 16 seed is because of John Calipari. He's proven it before. He's taken in 5 freshmen before and turned them into a top 25 team. So I think the main reason is because they look at the talent they brought in, whether it's going to work out or not with the players and meshing, we'll see. But, I think the poll rankers kind of look at John Calipari and say he's done it before. He's one of the best coaches to ever coach in college basketball, and they expect him to kind of figure it out rather than making the players obviously do it all themselves. So I think that they kind of will be a middle of the pack team, especially early, kind of like they were the last few years where they kind of pick it up a little bit in the SEC towards the end. But to me, it's going to be how they fill out the non-conference roster. Are they able to get those wins? Because last year they weren't. And that's the reason that they kind of took that dip early in the season. So I think we're going to learn a lot about Kentucky real fast with these young guys.
Yeah, and it's a really exciting group, and especially for us being, Philadelphia area people. You get DJ Wagner from Camden, Aaron Bradshaw from Camden, Justin Edwards from Imhotep. There's a lot of local flavor to this Kentucky team for Philadelphia people, so I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on them. I guess to round out our kind of big picture thoughts on the top 25, I know you're a North Carolina guy. I'm looking at them this year as one of the teams out of this top 25 bunch that I'm intrigued with. They come in at number 19 in the top 25 poll to start the season. Started last year as the number 1. They were the first team to ever start the season as the number 1 overall team and fail to make the NCAA tournament. So certainly last year, a season to forget for the Tar Heels fans. And I think pressure's on for Hubert Davis. He had that great run to the Final Four, to the national championship, even defeating Duke twice down the road as well in that first year. But if you remember that first regular season, that was a bumpy year. They were almost not even a tournament team. They found their way in and they got hot at the right time. That really helped them, benefited them there. But last year, a really down year, and I think there's a lot of pressure on Hubert Davis this year after two kind of bad regular seasons. Lost key pieces in Caleb Love, Pete Nance, and Leaky Black. But they do return R.J. Davis and Armando Bacot, who averaged 32 points per game between the two of them. And Bacot's a first-team All-American. Went out and did some work in the portal as well. I'm looking at this UNC team with an optimistic view, and I think that they're going to be an improved bunch from last year. I just think Caleb Love was kind of a bad fit there. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the Tar Heels going into this season.
Yeah, and we'll kind of get into it a little bit more when we talk about some of the big men. And I think that's been the biggest issue for them since Baycot's kind of been the leading man, is once he's kind of taken over that role as like the star player, they haven't really had that great of an outside shooting. They did in March, kind of like you touched on 2 years ago. But when you look at the regular season, their 3-point percentage was absolutely abysmal. And that's the same as going into last season as well, and they weren't able to make up for it like they did in March the year before. So that's kind of been what I've watched as a fan. Kind of like their biggest problem is when they get him touches inside and he has to kick it out, they're not knocking down shots. And so when you bring in a guy like Harrison Ingram, and he should be one from Stanford that has become a 3-point threat. And I think they brought in a few other guys as well. Some of the names aren't coming to me at the moment, but
Cormac Ryan from Notre Dame.
Yeah, he's a 3-point sniper. I remember watching him a few times kill North Carolina in the Dean Dome. So I think that's going to be their biggest piece, is can they make outside shots? Because if they can, we're going to be talking about them as a top 10 team, because they can defend and they can rebound. But it's all going to come down to whether or not they can hit it from outside. R.J. Davis can't do it all himself.
Yeah, and I think like I was saying with Caleb Love, he was kind of just a weird piece on that team because he was such like a ball dominant type guard where he would go work out of the ISO. UNC over the years historically has just been like such a good fast break team. And then they also let their big men do a lot of the work on the inside, including on the offensive glass. So I'm intrigued to see if they're able to get back to that style of play this year. Looking forward to watching the Tar Heels. All right, that'll wrap up our discussion kind of big picture-wise on the top 25. Now I kind of want to poke your brain at what's like a big storyline you're looking at heading into this year. We can talk about a bunch of different ones, but if you had to kind of highlight one thing that you're really going to be keeping an eye on going into this season, what would it be?
So my biggest thing is going to be looking at the Houston Cougars. They've been a dominant team for the last 5-6 years or so out of the American Conference, and now they're moving into the Big 12. You know, they've had their resume speaks for itself in terms of their record. The last few years being able to go, 33-4, 17-1 in their conference. But how is that going to translate now when you move into a bigger conference with more opponents throughout a whole season? Because obviously 17-1 in a conference schedule, you're pretty much dominating just about everybody. You get unlucky one night from not shooting well or something like that. But now how's it going to stand from, December till February? Are you able to get those primetime wins that we see on Saturday evenings and afternoons and things like that? Because, Kelvin Simpson has done a good job of building that group over the last 5-6 years or so. He's been able to really lock down defensively, and that's what we see in March, is teams that with good defense can do a good job. But is it going to be able to stand? They lost Marcus Sasser and two other major scorers from last season, which I think could be a little bit of a concern, at least early on, moving into that Big 12 play, because just having experience is a big thing. But they do get 4 freshmen and 2 other transfers, headlined by LJ Cryer from Baylor, which I think is going to be huge for them because he has that Big 12 experience, and he scored a lot of points for the Baylor Bears, scoring 15 points per game last season. They also get Damian Dunn, who also averaged around the same for Temple. So getting some high volume scorers to kind of move into this new era of some of these Power 5 kind of growing type of conferences. I'm really curious to see with what they do, because we know they can handle defensively. We've seen them do it in March. But now, is it just when you get hot, are they going to be able to do it for the whole season, is what I'm really curious to find out.
Yeah, and that's certainly a leg up in competition as well, going from the AAC to the Big 12, which we talked about at the beginning. Probably over the past decade has been the best conference in college hoops. But I'm intrigued to see that as well with, not just a level of talent, but the level of physicality as well. Because what Houston, I think, has really prided themselves on over these past few years under Kelvin Sampson is just their physical nature and their toughness and just being able to push guys around. They're not going to be able to do that as easy in the Big 12. But like you said, bringing in guys like LJ Cryer who have been there, done that. Jamal Shed is coming back as well. They already have that culture established. So I think they're going to still carry that same identity. But I even saw a Kelvin Sampson quote. He said himself, like, this, we know we're not going to be able to just go out there and dominate every night. Like, it's going to have to be a more of a struggle. We're prepared for that. We know we're not going to be the elite of the conference right away when you have to compete with the likes of Kansas and Baylor. So it's going to be a bit of an adjustment, I think, but they certainly have the talent, the coaching staff, I think the mindset to make some noise in the Big 12 this year. Um, but a thing I'm looking at, I think the biggest storyline in college basketball this year is the Purdue Boilermakers. We kind of touched on them a little bit at the beginning, but I think the major storyline surrounding them is just going to be the revenge tour of them. If they're losing to number 16 FDU Florida or FDU last year, not FDU Florida, FDU last year as a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Uh, the last time that ever happened in the NCAA tournament was when Virginia lost to UMBC, and they went on next year to win it all. Can Purdue do the same thing? That narrative is going to be out there. It's going to be talked about the entire season. But arguably having the best player in the entire country, most dominant player in Zach Edey. Matt Painter, a very good coach, but he's really struggled in the tournament. He's never made it to the Final Four. You kind of touched on it earlier, too. This team only shot 32% from three last year, but they were all young guards playing in the Big Ten. You have to figure with that whole year of experience and winning under their belt that they're going to come back a better group. Went 29-6 last year, 15-5 in the Big Ten regular season and in the league and the tournament. Can they carry that success from the entire regular season into the tournament? Because they've struggled to get out of that first weekend over these past few years. So I think there's going to be a lot of close eyes on the Purdue Boilermakers this upcoming winter.
Yeah, I agree, and that's kind of why I had them, I guess, as a little bit of a overrated team, is because ranked number three in the team, ranked as the number three team in the country, you kind of feel like you know what you're going to expect, and we may touch on the number one and number two seeds, but we kind of know what we're going to get from them, right? A lot of people are still wondering what is Purdue going to do with Zach Edey coming back and some of these other talented guys coming back. And the fact that we don't really know for sure and that we still need to see it is what blows my mind a little bit about this team. Like, obviously, Zach Edey is the reason that this team is the number three team in the country. And I do still believe they're a top 10 team and they're going to make the tournament. And I do expect them to make noise. I don't expect them to get knocked out in the first round. But the fact that we need to sit down and watch this team and still are wondering is kind of why I was a little curious to see them at the number three spot.
All right, the next kind of thing I want to go into kind of ties into a lot of what we just talked about with Purdue, but we've also talked about it a bit with North Carolina, Kansas losing some of their big guys, Kentucky losing some of their big guys, Kansas bringing in a very talented new big man, Villanova having some good big men. It seems like the big men have been the center of discussion in the sport the past 2 or 3 years, and I think it's going to be at the center of discussion this year as well. They've been dominating the college game. If you look at 4 of the 5 preseason first-team All-Americans are front-court players with Zach Edey at Purdue, Hunter Dickinson transferring from Michigan to Kansas, Armando Bacot back for another year at UNC, and then Kyle Filipowski at Duke as well. He's more of a stretch forward type guy, but he's another 7-footer. There's only one guard on the preseason All-American team. It's weird with the evolution of the guard play and what we've been seeing in the NBA with all the threes and whatnot, and just kind of throughout high school, college basketball. It's such a game predicated on shooting now. When we look at college basketball, it's a game that's dominated by the big man, but it also comes down to guard play at the end of the road. So I was just kind of curious what your thoughts are on the big men and their role right now in college basketball.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it right at the end of your sentence there. The big men, they've been very dominant, and I think a big reason for that is in college basketball specifically, especially with the 30-second shot clock, rebounding is such a key important factor in college basketball. I don't know I mean, obviously it's important in all levels, but I think it's a little less involving in the NBA. But so having a true big man who's 7 foot, 6'10", something like that, and can rebound is part of the reason of why they're so important. But I agree with you that I think the guard play is the key factor. Because when we look in March, right, that's what everyone wants to know is how our team's going to perform in March. Teams that shoot the ball well are the teams that make it. You know, when I look at Armando Bacot specifically in North Carolina, just because I watch them probably the most, when he gets paint touches and they double him, he has to kick it out and they don't make shots. There's only so much that he can do as a big man. And so I think when you talk about Hunter Dickinson and Kyle Filipowski, that's kind of where they are able to turn their game into a little bit more of an important factor rather than, say, Edie and Baycott, because they do have that ability to stretch out. But as far as it being like true importance, it's important in the regular season because I think it helps get wins, but I don't think it's what matters down the stretch in March. Um, the only exception that we've really ever seen with it is Adama Sanogo last year, but he had some help with Jordan Hawkins scoring 16 points per game in the tournament last year. So he's really the only true big that we've seen truly dominate throughout the whole tournament and lead his team to dominant wins throughout the tournament. But, when we look at everybody else, North Carolina, for example, with Armando Bacot, the season that they had last year, not very good. The year before, the only reason they made it was because R.J. Davis and Caleb Love got hot from three. When you look at Zach Edey and Purdue, knocked out last year. So, and Michigan has been struggling as well, mainly because of the outside shooting around of Hunter Dickinson and Kyle Filipowski. We'll see what we get with Duke. We expect them to be better, but that's kind of my take on the big men.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kind of last year's Final Four, Miami was such a guard-dominated team with Nigel Pack, Isaiah Wong. UConn, as you touched on, had two really good bigs with Sunogo and Donovan Clingan. We didn't even mention him yet. He might be the breakout player of the sport this year, having that. I think he could have that like Zach Edey type jump where Zach Edey went from, a guy playing half the game to 75% of the game, and he went out there and dominated San Diego State, Florida Atlantic. They were all teams that had guard-oriented teams. And like we were talking about, Purdue might have been the best team last year in college basketball, but down the stretch, they didn't have a guard to go to. I think that's always a thing me and Kometz always talk about as well. It's like guard play finds a way to win in March. But as you said, if you have that dominant big, it helps you with your regular season so much more. I mean, we've really talked about Purdue a lot, but if one of those guards is able to step up and be a Big Ten, all-caliber Big Ten type player this year, Purdue is going to be a really tough out because Zach Edey's going to dominate as long as he stays healthy no matter what. Just can the guys around him do enough to help them really advance throughout the tournament, make shots when it counts, when teams have extra time to prepare and game plan for you? Are you able to still kind of exploit those matchups? And that's what it's going to come down to. Filipowski, though, I'm all in on him this year. He's actually my prediction for National Player of the Year this year. I think coming back was a big choice for him individually, but for the Duke team as well. He puts that Duke team right up there in the top 5 heading into this year. And I think his ability to get the ball off the glass and push it in transition and make plays there, able to score in the half court, able to create his own shot, able to hit the three we saw last year. He's just a guy that I think is going to come back more comfortable and confident this year. I'm expecting a huge season from him, and he's my pick for National Player of the Year. Just curious as to what your thoughts are on Filipowski's game as a whole.
Yeah, I mean he's a really good player. Kind of like what we said with me watching North Carolina. I've watched him a lot the last year with him being in the ACC, and he is a truly dominant someone that's 7 foot like that and can shoot and can dribble and can move the way he moves. He should have been an NBA player already. The fact that he comes back is a huge get for John Shire to come back. And we'll get into it a little later. I think they are a true favorite to win the national championship. I know the odds makers already have them as such, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Duke in April playing in the final game because of him specifically.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we'll get into last few discussions now. We kind of touched on some experience guys. This year, like one and done wise, it's not being hyped up that much as potential, great draft picks coming out. This is viewed as a weaker year at the top of the draft, but we saw some intriguing freshmen that are going to make some splashes this year, as we know in college basketball. So I'm kind of curious as to who's a guy that you're really looking forward to watching this year coming out of this year's freshman class.
So my guy I picked is the number one guy coming out of this year's class is Isaiah Coyle from going to USC, 6'4" guard, point guard actually. Very fast downhill playmaking. I watched some highlights yesterday and the day before. This man can move. And the thing that impressed me the most is his ability to pass the basketball. When I was looking up some of his high school statistics, obviously it's going to be a little different in college, but only had like two turnovers a game average, with 5 to 6 assists average. So his assist to turnover ratio is really, really good there. And I'm really curious to see with how he does paired with Boogie Ellis. We expect USC to take a huge jump in a wide open Pac-12, and I think he's going to be the key factor from it, because it's going to get Boogie off the ball, and because we know how good of a shooter he can be, averaging 17 points per game last year for the Trojans. So, and they're projecting him as a top 5 pick in next year's draft. They do expect him to be a one and done. And, when you're the number one guy, all eyes are going to be on you. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do when it's on you? And we know with Bronny James and everything coming with USC, we got 2 high quality freshmen there, but I think the eyes are still going to be on him because of how much the ball is going to be in his hands. He's going to be expected to be that playmaker and getting guys open and creating shots for other people. So I'm really curious to see how elite he can make this backcourt, because that's been kind of an issue we've seen with USC. They've had some dominant big men, but their guard play has been up and down. Can he be the reason that USC takes this next step this year?
Yeah, and the thing with him too, I think he's very well physically developed for a guy coming into a freshman. Like he's built like a Division I running back or linebacker. Like he's not going to be. I don't think he's going to have that college adjustment period where it's just with his body. He's just going to be physically ready to go from day one. Is he able to translate all his skills? We'll see about that. I'm still a little bit worried. I think about his outside shooting, but like you said, being able to get to the rim and get downhill, he's going to be able to do that at a high level. But once he gets into that conference play and teams are kind of taking that away from him, is he able to hurt them from the outside? That's something we need to see. But the guy I'm looking forward to seeing the most out of this freshman class is a local guy. I touched on him a little bit earlier, but that's 6'7" forward for Kentucky this year out of Imhotep Charter in Philadelphia, Justin Edwards. He's a long, lanky lefty, a high riser. He should be a guy that's on a bunch of highlight films. It won't surprise me at all to see him, all over Instagram Reels, all over TikTok, all over Twitter with some highlight plays, whether it's dunking the ball, whether it's defensive plays, pinning guys. He's going to be a fun player to watch in transition. And he's a guy that's being talked about as a potential number 1 pick next year. He was the number 3 overall recruit out of this class, according to ESPN, I believe, committed to Kentucky. So he's going to a very talented Kentucky bunch, as we touched on. There's only one ball to go around. But the thing is with Justin Edwards, he is able to impact the game in a multitude of ways. On the defensive end, he's able to, I think, facilitate. He's pretty good with the ball in his hands as an 18-year-old already, and he's going to be an elite defender, I think, from day one. So really intrigued to see what Justin Edwards brings to the table. As we talked about, though, with Collier, he's got that physically ready body. Justin Edwards certainly needs to put on some more weight to his frame, so I'm intrigued to see whether or not his body's able to hold up in this year in the SEC.
Yeah, the thing that kind of intrigues me about Justin is his ability to score from all levels. In high school, shooting 39.5% from deep last year in high school. So the fact that you get somebody that big, and I know we've kind of touched on it already with the big men being able to shoot, but people who are just that big and can score from all levels just makes them so deadly. And I think that's kind of been something that Kentucky's been missing. When you talk about Oscar Tshiebwe, he wasn't an outside shooter. He was dominant inside and was a big shot blocker. But when you can affect the game in all phases, not just necessarily inside the paint as a big man, it does wonders for your team. And I think that's going to be a main reason that he kind of puts Kentucky back to where they're supposed to be and where we think they should be.
All right, quick hitter here, a little fun one. A 5-leg parlay on DraftKings Sportsbook for conference champions. Run me through them, their odds real quick, and what a $5 wager would pay out on this 5-leg conference champion parlay.
All right. So the first one I got here, I took the number 10 team that we were kind of touching on earlier. I took FAU. I think the biggest thing with them is their abilities to, get everybody back. I think they do a good job there. They're the favorites at plus 105. And then I got San Diego State coming out of the Mountain West. There's not really anybody to contend with them. I got them as the favorite at plus 140. Um, Next one, Michigan State coming out of the Big Ten. I think Michigan State is a team that, it's going to be a little bit under the radar in terms of the Big Ten, just because of how much we've talked about Purdue already in this podcast specifically. And I think that's going to go for everyone that talks about college basketball. I think they do enough to just edge past Purdue and get that one there at plus 300. Out of the Pac-12, I took USC. I think that is just a toss-up between them and Arizona. I think it's going to come down to whoever wins the head-to-head matchups there. And I like the fact that USC is a little bit more experienced down low, as we kind of talked about with the big men and the boards and stuff like that. So I think they get it done there. And lastly, a team that we haven't necessarily touched on, but Dayton, I took at plus 290. They're the favorites in the A10. I expect them to be dominant. VCU lost their head coach along with 7 of their top 8 scorers, and Dayton didn't really lose much of anybody. I see them dominating the A10. So if a $5 wager for those pays out $1,439 with 20 cents.
There you go. A rich little payout there. All right, my 5-legger. I have Kansas winning the Big 12 at plus 200. I just think it's death taxes and Bill Self winning the Big 12. I mean, it's going to be a little bit harder this year, as we talked about with Houston coming into the fold, but bringing in Hunter Dickinson along with everything else they returned and another strong recruiting class, Kansas should be right up there at the top again. I'm going to go Gonzaga winning the West Coast Conference at minus 125. Same thing. You're not going to go rich betting against Gonzaga as long as Mark Few's there. So I got them winning there. A little bit of a surprise one, but I think this team's going to make some noise in the SEC this year. That's Texas A&M at plus 450. If you look at Buzz Williams and his history as a head coach, once he gets into like year 3, year 4, year 5, he really gets cooking there and has some really good teams. This is a Texas A&M team that I believe won 15 games in the SEC last year, so they should be right there in the mix with Wade Taylor coming back, another really experienced bunch. Should be a fun team to watch. Fourth leg, San Diego State plus 140 out of the Mountain West, like you were talking about. A team that returns a lot of guys coming off a Final Four appearance, a national title appearance. They should be the favorite clearly in the Mountain West this year. And as long as they stay healthy, they should find their way to the top of the conference again. And then my 5th leg, I'm going to go with Purdue at plus 200 out of the Big Ten. I really do like this Michigan State team as well, but I just think it's going to be too hard on a nightly basis to contain Zach Edey. If you can get them on that one off night like FDU is able to, God bless you, but it's going to be hard night in, night out to find a way to stop that guy, especially if the guards have developed over the course of the offseason. So my 5-leg parlay, Kansas, Gonzaga, Texas A&M, San Diego State, and Purdue all to win the conference. $5 wager there pays out $1,069.20. So if you put either one of those down after listening to this podcast, make sure to get back to us and give us a chunk of the change if either one of them hit. All right, to wrap up the show real quick, Gurm, it's been a good discussion on some of the biggest topics in college basketball this year. But give me your Final Four and your national champion, and if you have it in front of you, your national champion's odds on the DraftKings Sportsbook to win it all.
Yeah. All right. So my Final Four, I have Duke. We kind of touched on them a little bit. They returned 4 starters, and you get two of the major top freshmen in Jared McCain and Caleb Foster. And we kind of touched on Kyle Filipowski. I just think they, especially when you talk about an ACC that over the last few years isn't super competitive outside of Miami and North Carolina. I think they win a lot of games, and they play usually a very hard out of conference schedule. So I think they're ready to get back to the Final Four there. The next team I have is Creighton, and they almost made it last year. Lost by I believe it was a point or 2 points to San Diego State last year, and they returned three key pieces. When you talk about Ryan Kalkbrenner with the Defensive Player of the Year, you got Bailey Scheitman and Trey Alexander. So I think Creighton is going to be competitive with Marquette. We'll see who wins. It could be a nightly basis in terms of the Big East, in terms of who wins that. But I think Creighton will get the chips right and do what they need to do in March. The next one I have is Arkansas, a team that we haven't really touched on, but it was a team that I was very impressed with when I watched them on Sunday playing Purdue. And like I said, I don't take too much stock in it, but when you also talk about their run last year, making it to, I believe it was the Sweet 16, or was it the Elite Eight? I don't remember, but it was the second weekend. Um, and they returned a lot of their guys back, and they're usually a really high defensive unit, and they're going to have a lot of success in the SEC. I think they'll be battle tested, and they'll be able to get to the Final Four. And then lastly, I have Texas, a team that we didn't touch on much, but they return a lot of their guys from a 22-9 finish from last year, and you get one of the best ball scorers in college basketball and Max Asmus. I think it's going to take them a little bit to get going, especially when you talk about Asmus. He's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. I think you could see him struggle early, and then as they work their way into the Big 12 schedule, he kind of turns things on, and that gets them ready for March. And that kind of rounds out the Final Four. And then with the national champion, I took Creighton. I think they're just truly built for it. Defensively, they're one of the best teams in the country, obviously anchored by Ryan Kalkbrenner, but they can also shoot the ball really well. We saw that last year in the tournament, and they like to get up and down, which I think is a good thing. And they don't turn the ball over. Those are the two things. Can you play fast pace without turning the ball over? And that usually translates well to a good postseason. So I think Creighton gets it done there.
All right. My Final Four, I have Kansas. I just think right now Bill Self is the best coach in college basketball. You bring in arguably a top 5 player in the sport, maybe the biggest transfer portal get ever in Hunter Dickinson, especially for a coach that has used big men so well in his coaching career. I think Dickinson's in for a huge season. DeJuan Harris back at the point guard and a bunch of other experienced guys, as well as some young recruits that are talented and going to be in the mix right away. I think they have a big year coming up. I'm going to go with my second Final Four team, going to be Marquette. Another team, they bring back 8 of their 9 top scorers from last year, 87% of their offense. They bring back Tyler Kolek, last year's Big East Player of the Year. Osa Ighodaro, Cam Jones, their leading scorer from last year. This is a team bringing back a ton that kind of got left the season with a sour taste in their mouth last year, losing to Michigan State in the tournament. Tyler Kolek had that broken thumb. They weren't 100%. This was a team that won the Big East tournament and regular season, so a team to be reckoned with, I think, coming back this year. Third team, I touched on them a little bit ago, but a team I think I'm a little bit higher on than most, Texas A&M. I'm a huge believer in Buzz Williams. I think they get it done in the SEC this year. I think they'll be the best team in the SEC. Wade Taylor coming back for another year, a very experienced guard, very high on this A&M Aggie squad. And then my fourth team, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box, I think, with this one, but I'm going to go with Arizona. I think they're going to be a fun watch this year. As always with Tommy Lloyd, they're going to be a team that gets up and down. And I think the Pac-12 is going to be down this year. Kind of the opposite of football. We're seeing the best year ever from the Pac-12 in terms of football. This year for basketball, I think it's going to be a little bit down. I think Arizona is going to be potentially that number 1 team out of the bracket, the number 1 overall seed, where they're kind of that 30-2 type record or something headed into the tournament, and they don't really have much blemishes on their schedule, because I do think their biggest competition typically is a UCLA, who I think is going to have a down year, probably be a 8 or 9 seed. USC ushering in some new faces. I think this Arizona squad is a really good experienced bunch, so I'm looking for them to make the Final Four. And my national champion, I'm going to go with Marquette. I think that they're going to be a team on a mission this year, playing in the Big East. It could go one of two ways. They're going to be either a really battle-tested team and see everything they need to headed into the big dance and have all those challenges already, or they're going to be kind of beaten down, broken down from playing such a tough, grueling conference schedule. So a little bit wary in that regard, but bringing back 8 of their 9 top guys from a 2 seed last year, Big East Player of the Year from the year before, a coach that's gone to the Final Four before. I'm really high on this Marquette team, and they're my pick this year to cut down the nets. I got them on a future right now at 18-1 and 6-1 to make the Final Four. So That'll do it for our college basketball primer. Definitely be cranking out some more videos as we head throughout the season and really start getting into the thick of it. But I guess any last second comments, Gurm, before we head out on this year's upcoming college basketball season?
No, I just wanted to thank you for having me, and let's have a good basketball season, man. I can't wait. I'm glad it's getting started.
Yeah, for sure. As we said, it starts on Monday night. I know UConn plays like Northern Arizona. There's also, I think it's like USC plays Kansas State on Monday night. There's a few good games to start off the season. So looking forward to getting those underway, and then really some of these big time conference matchups and non-conference matchups kicking off along the road as well. But as always, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and we will talk soon.